Welcome to Life Stories. What would you do if the person you trusted most betrayed you in the worst possible way? Charlotte Hayes had built a life with her husband, Nathan, believing in love, trust, and family. But when her mother fell critically ill, Nathan saw the perfect opportunity to steal everything: her home, her inheritance, and her future. With a shocking betrayal and millions at stake, Charlotte was left with nothing, or so he thought. This is a story of deception, resilience, and the ultimate revenge. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the steady beeping of monitors and the muffled urgency of voices beyond the heavy double doors. Mrs. Hayes, your mother's condition is critical. We need to operate immediately. The doctor's words echoed through the sterile hospital corridor, each syllable tightening the knot in my stomach. My grip on my phone grew rigid as I dialed Nathan's number for the sixth time. Each unanswered ring felt like a needle pressing against my skin, drawing out my last sliver of patience. Finally, he picked up. What is it now, Charlotte? He snapped. I'm in an important meeting. That coldness, I knew it too well. It was the same voice he used when he had long stopped caring. Long before I had found the courage to admit it to myself. Mom's being rushed into emergency surgery. I need you here. My voice wavered, despite my best efforts to sound strong. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow over the linoleum floor as I braced myself for his response. A pause. Then, in that clipped, detached tone, he said, "Sorry, can't make it. Big things happening. Just handle it yourself." The line went dead. For a moment, I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, as if the silence might shift. As if the man I had once loved might reconsider. But I already knew better. I was alone in this. As I watched the nurses wheel my mother toward the ICU, the weight of everything settled over me like a lead blanket. Memories I had kept locked away came flooding back. Summer afternoons in the estate garden. The scent of roses drifting through the open windows. My father's laughter echoing through the grand hallways. That house had been more than just a home, it was a piece of us. A living archive of our family's history. After my father passed 3 years ago, my mother and I had inherited it together. Every creaking floorboard, every intricate molding, every crack in the stone facade whispered stories of love, of loss, of resilience. I had always believed that Nathan understood that, or at least, I had wanted to believe he did. When we first married 15 years ago, he would spend weekends tending to my mother's beloved rose garden, smiling as she taught him the delicate art of pruning. I had watched him laugh with my father over long discussions of estate management. Eager to learn, eager to be a part of our legacy. But somewhere along the way, his heart had hardened. 5 years ago, it had started with longer hours at the office, business trips that stretched for weeks, and conversations that turned transactional. After my father's passing, it had worsened. His interest in our family estate grew not out of affection, but out of something else. Something sharper, something greedy. I should have seen it coming. Sitting in the ICU waiting room, I wiped my damp palms against my jeans, willing myself to stay composed. The dull hum of the vending machine, the shuffle of nurses passing by, the quiet murmur of worried families filled the space. But I was barely aware of it. My phone vibrated against my palm. I looked down. A message from Nathan. Secured my future. Just sold the estate. Leaving for Brazil tonight with someone who actually makes me happy. Goodbye. For a second, I felt nothing. Just a vast, eerie stillness settling inside me. Then, something shifted. A cold, sharp awareness that seeped into my bones. He thought he had won. But what Nathan didn't know was that I had been watching him for months. The private investigator I had hired, Melissa, had kept me well informed of his every move, his secret meetings, his forged documents, the young secretary he had been lavishing with stolen wealth. I exhaled slowly, my fingers steady as I typed back a single word. Fascinating. I looked up, my gaze settling on my mother's frail form through the ICU window. A quiet resolve took root in my chest, growing stronger with every breath. Nathan had no idea what was coming. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting someone walk straight into the trap they set for themselves. The hospital room was dimly lit, the faint hum of machines punctuating the silence. I sat beside my mother's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, her face pale against the stark white sheets. I reached out, gently brushing a loose strand of silver hair away from her forehead. She looked so fragile, so small, nothing like the woman who had once ruled our family's estate with quiet grace and unwavering strength. Nathan had chosen this moment when she was at her weakest, to strike. I pulled my phone from my pocket, rereading his message. Secured my future. Just sold the estate. Leaving for Brazil tonight with someone who actually makes me happy. A fresh wave of disgust rolled over me. That house was more than just a collection of bricks and wood. It was my mother's home. My father's legacy. The heartbeat of our family. He had ripped it from us without a second thought. Without so much as a conversation. But Nathan wasn't as clever as he thought. I had suspected something for months. The late nights at the office. The hushed phone calls. The carefully folded receipts I had found in his suit pockets. Ones that had nothing to do with our life together. 2 months ago, when I stumbled upon a luxury condo receipt for a property in Rio de Janeiro buried deep in his emails, I knew I had to act. That was when I hired Melissa, my private investigator. Her findings had confirmed everything. Nathan had been meeting with potential buyers for weeks, presenting them with forged documents that falsely claimed he was the sole owner of our estate. The irony of it all would have been laughable if it hadn't been so cruel. He had spent years trying to gain control of something that had never been his to sell in the first place. Because my grandmother had been smarter than him. Decades ago, long before Nathan ever entered my life, she had placed the estate into an irrevocable trust, ensuring that it could never be sold without the proper documentation from the trust administrator. And that administrator? That was me. Nathan had no authority over the estate. He had signed away his own fate. And he didn't even know it yet. A small, bitter smile formed on my lips as I reached for my purse. Pulling out my grandmother's old leather diary. Inside, tucked between pages of faded ink and pressed flowers, were the very documents that would undo him. The original trust agreement, the legal provisions, the protections she had put in place to ensure that no one, could take what was rightfully ours. I turned the pages slowly, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. Family isn't just about blood, Charlotte. It's about trust. It's about protecting what matters most. My phone vibrated again. Another message. But this time, it wasn't from Nathan. Melissa. Charlotte. I have something urgent. Can you check your email? I frowned, opening my inbox. The attachment she had sent loaded within seconds. And as soon as I saw the first image, my breath caught in my throat. Nathan, laughing at an expensive restaurant. A glass of wine in one hand and his mistress, Olivia, leaning into him with that smug, satisfied smile. Another picture. The two of them shopping at Tiffany's. A velvet box in his hands. And then another, standing in a real estate office, reviewing documents with a potential buyer. But it was the last image that made my stomach turn. A blurry close-up of a contract. A property transfer agreement. And right there, in bold ink, was my forged signature. My pulse pounded in my ears. Nathan, I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. Melissa's email continued. He's been emptying your personal accounts for months. The estate sale was just the final piece. Most of your liquid assets have already been transferred to offshore accounts. I yanked my banking app open. My balance flashed on the screen. $842. The joint account we had once shared? Completely empty. He had taken everything. A sharp, hot anger burned through me. Swallowing the shock, the grief, the betrayal. He had timed this perfectly. Waiting for my mother to be too sick to fight back. Waiting for me to be too distracted, too heartbroken to notice what he was doing. But he had underestimated me. For the first time in months, I felt something close to clarity. Nathan thought he had won. Thought he had secured his future. Thought he had stolen my family's legacy. He was wrong, because I wasn't the same woman who had once loved him. I was the woman who would end him. The ICU waiting room felt colder now, though I knew it had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. It was the realization that the man I had once trusted with my heart had been dismantling my life. Piece by piece, without me even noticing, until now. Nathan had taken almost everything. But what he hadn't realized was that he had left behind something far more valuable than money. He had left me with the truth. And the truth had always been my greatest weapon. I tapped out a response to Melissa. Charlotte, call me, now. Within seconds, my phone rang. I answered before the first ring even finished. Tell me everything, I said. Melissa's voice was steady but urgent. Nathan has been planning this for a while. I traced the money trail. The offshore accounts? He's been funneling money into them for years. This wasn't impulsive. He's been bleeding you dry. Waiting for the right moment to disappear. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around my phone. And the buyers? They think they've made a clean purchase. He provided them with documents that look legitimate, forged. Of course, but they don't know that yet. The money was transferred this morning. $3.2 million. Straight to an offshore account in his name. I exhaled slowly, my mind already turning over the next steps. And Olivia? Melissa scoffed. Right by his side. She's been in on this from the start. She works for a shell company that's been laundering money from similar scams. This isn't just about the estate. Charlotte, Nathan has done this before. A sick realization settled over me. How many? I asked, barely above a whisper. Melissa hesitated before answering. At least 6 other families. He targeted people during medical crises, families distracted by grief or illness. Just like you, he'd forge power of attorney documents, fake financial distress, and then move in for the kill. My stomach twisted. Nathan hadn't just betrayed me. He had made a career out of ruining lives. I rose from my chair, pacing the quiet waiting room. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Melissa, listen to me, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. He's already at the airport. Isn't he? Yes. I have his flight details. First-class tickets to Rio, leaving in 2 hours. If you want to stop him, we need to move fast. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. He's not going anywhere. Because Nathan had built his entire escape plan on a lie. He thought he had the final move. He thought he had stolen my mother's home, my inheritance, my security. But he had made one fatal mistake. He never read the fine print. I grabbed my grandmother's diary from my bag, flipping to the pages that held the trust documents. The irrevocable trust she had set up decades ago had never granted him ownership of the estate. Any sale without my authorization was fraudulent. Nathan had just sold something he didn't own. And in doing so, he had committed real estate fraud, on a multi-million-dollar scale. I tapped Melissa's name again, calling her back. Get me in touch with the buyer. Mr. Whitman, right? Melissa was silent for a moment. Then, she let out a low chuckle. You're about to turn this whole thing around, aren't you? Damn right, I am, I said, already reaching for my coat. Nathan played a long game. But I'm about to end it in one move. I strode toward my mother's ICU room, pressing my hand lightly against the doorframe. I watched her for a moment, her breathing steady but weak. I'll fix this, Mom, I whispered. I promise. Then, without another moment of hesitation, I walked out of the hospital and into the night, ready to take everything back. The courthouse was silent, save for the sound of shuffling papers and the judge's steady voice reading out the charges. 37 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and theft. The weight of Nathan's crimes hung in the air like a storm cloud. And for the first time, I saw it, the fear in his eyes. Gone was the confident, smooth-talking man who had once whispered sweet promises in my ear. Gone was the arrogance, the certainty that he would always be one step ahead. Now, he sat slouched in his seat, his hands clenched into fists as the reality of his situation set in. There was no escaping this. Olivia sat beside him, her once proud posture deflated. She had been marked by the security dye from the estate's safe. The evidence of her attempted theft glowing under UV lights. They had planned to disappear together. But now they would face justice together. When the judge set bail at $5 million each, an amount neither of them could afford, Nathan turned. his eyes locking onto mine. He glared at me, as if I were the one who had betrayed him. But I only smiled. I had learned something through this ordeal. True wealth isn't measured in money or property, but in the people who stand beside you when everything falls apart. Nathan had never understood that. And that's why, in the end, he had lost everything. As the guards led him away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. And so, with my mother by my side and our home still standing, I walked out of that courthouse, stepping into a new beginning. Subscribe to Life Stories for more real-life tales of resilience and justice.